The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bustling park. Warren Buffett strolled quietly along the paved path, his hands tucked into the pockets of his simple jacket. He loved walking through places like this, blending into the world without the weight of his name. Today, however, something caught his eye. A young girl sitting on the edge of the park's fountain, carefully arranging small handmade bracelets on a piece of cloth spread out in front of her. Her clothes were slightly worn, and her tiny frame seemed out of place against the busy backdrop of the park. Yet, there was something captivating about her. She worked with a quiet determination, her small hands deftly threading beads and tying knots. A cardboard sign rested beside her, its letters slightly crooked, but clear enough to read, "Handmade jewelry, $5, for my mom." Warren slowed his pace, watching as people passed by the girl, without sparing her more than a glance. A few children paused to look, but their parents quickly ushered them along, throwing dismissive glances toward the girl's little setup. She sat there patiently, her hopeful eyes scanning the crowd for someone, anyone, who might stop. As Warren observed, a man in a crisp suit paused briefly near the girl's spot. She looked up eagerly, holding up one of her bracelets. "Would you like to buy one, sir? They're only $5, she said, her voice soft but hopeful. The man barely glanced at the bracelet before waving her off. "No, thank you," he said curtly, his tone dismissive. He walked away quickly, muttering something under his breath that Warren couldn't quite hear, but the tone was unmistakable. It stung. The girl's shoulders slumped slightly, but she quickly straightened and resumed arranging her bracelets, as though determined not to let the rejection show. Warren felt a pang in his chest. He didn't know her story, but her resolve was undeniable. He decided to approach, curious to understand what had brought her here. As he neared, the girl looked up at him, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Hello, sir," she said politely. "Would you like to buy a bracelet? They're only $5, and they're handmade." Warren crouched slightly, picking up one of the bracelets. It was simple, made of colorful beads and a thin piece of string, but there was something honest and heartfelt in its design. "These are beautiful," he said with a genuine smile. "You made all of these yourself?" The girl nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, sir. I make them every night after school. My mom says I should focus on homework, but I want to help her. She's been sick, and we're behind on rent." Warren's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "That's a very brave thing you're doing," he said, his voice warm. "How has business been today?" The girl hesitated, glancing down at the small tin box beside her. "Not very good," she admitted quietly, "but I'm not giving up." Warren studied her for a moment, his mind already racing with thoughts. He handed her a $20 bill and picked up the bracelet. "I'll take this one," he said, "and keep the change." The girl's eyes widened as she took the bill. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "You don't know how much this helps." Warren smiled and nodded. "You're welcome," he said, standing up. "But tell me, what would you do if you had a little more money?" The girl tilted her head, clearly puzzled by the question. "More money?" she repeated. I'd pay the rent, get my mom the medicine she needs, and maybe buy more beads to make better bracelets." Warren's smile deepened, but he didn't say anything more. Instead, he walked away slowly, his mind already forming a plan. The girl watched him go, her heart lighter than it had been all day, unaware that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. The next morning, Warren returned to the park, this time with a small envelope tucked into the inner pocket of his jacket. He walked the familiar path, scanning the area until he spotted the girl in the same spot near the fountain. Her blanket was neatly spread out, and her bracelets, though modest, were arranged with care. She was already busy tying beads onto a string, her tiny fingers moving with practiced precision. Warren approached quietly, watching as a middle-aged couple stopped briefly near her setup. The girl looked up hopefully, offering them her brightest smile. "Good morning. Would you like to buy a bracelet? They're only $5, and they're handmade." The man glanced at the bracelets but shook his head, giving a polite but uninterested smile. "No, thank you," he said, before walking away with his wife. The girl's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly composed herself, her resilience shining through as she adjusted her display. Warren stepped closer, his shadow falling over the blanket. The girl looked up, her expression brightening when she recognized him. "You're back," she said excitedly. "I am," Warren replied warmly. "You made an impression on me yesterday. I couldn't stop thinking about how hard you're working." The girl blushed slightly, ducking her head as she tied off the bracelet she'd been working on. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I just want to help my mom. She's done so much for me, and now it's my turn." Warren crouched down, his expression soft but serious. "You're an amazing young lady," he said, "and I think you deserve a little help." The girl tilted her head, clearly puzzled. "Help?" she asked, her voice cautious. Warren reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope. He held it out to her, his voice calm and steady. "This is for you and your mom." The girl's eyes flicked between Warren and the envelope, her small hands hesitating before she took it. "What is it?" she asked nervously. "Open it," Warren said, his smile encouraging. With trembling fingers, the girl carefully tore open the envelope. Inside was a stack of crisp bills, neatly folded and totaling $10,000. Her breath caught, and her eyes filled with disbelief as she stared at the money. $10,000, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Warren nodded, his tone gentle. "That's right. It's enough to cover your rent, your mom's medicine, and maybe even help you buy those beads you were talking about." The girl's eyes filled with tears, and her hands shook as she clutched the envelope to her chest. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Why would you do this for us?" Warren placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Because I believe in you," he said simply, "and because sometimes even the strongest people need a little help." The girl stared at him for a long moment before suddenly throwing her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you so much." Warren patted her back gently, his own eyes misting over. "You're very welcome," he said softly. "But there's one thing I'd like you to do for me." The girl pulled back, wiping her tears and nodding. "Anything," she said earnestly. "When you grow up and you're in a position to help someone else, I want you to remember this moment," Warren said, "and pay it forward." The girl nodded vigorously, her small face full of determination. "I promise," she said. As Warren stood, the park seemed to quiet around them. The girl's gratitude had drawn the attention of nearby onlookers, who now watched the scene with a mix of awe and curiosity. Some whispered among themselves, trying to piece together what had just happened. Warren gave the girl one last smile before walking away, his steps unhurried and his heart lighter than it had been in years. Behind him, the girl clutched the envelope tightly, her mind racing with possibilities, her future suddenly brighter than she'd dared to imagine. As Warren walked away, the whispers among the park-goers grew louder. People were piecing together the interaction, their curiosity driving them to approach the young girl. A woman with kind eyes and a stroller leaned down toward her. Sweetheart, what just happened? That man, he gave you something, didn't he? The girl hesitated, clutching the envelope tightly, unsure if she should share. But her innocence and excitement got the better of her. He gave me this, she said, carefully opening the envelope to show the stack of bills. Gasps rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. $10,000, someone murmured. Another man, standing a few feet away, muttered under his breath, "Why would anyone give a kid that kind of money?" The girl's face flushed as she realized the growing attention. "He said it was to help my mom and me," she explained, her voice soft but firm. "He told me to use it for rent, medicine, and whatever we need." The murmurs continued, a mix of disbelief, admiration, and, from a few, quiet skepticism. One woman crossed her arms and said, "Well, he must be trying to make a point. People don't just do that for no reason." The girl looked up at her, confused by the doubt in her tone. "He did it because he's kind," she said simply. "He said he believes in me." The crowd grew quiet for a moment, the girl's sincerity cutting through the noise. But just as the atmosphere began to settle, an older man in a suit stepped forward, his expression a mix of curiosity and judgment. "Do you know who that was?" he asked, his voice sharp. "That was Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world. Of course he can afford to give away money like that." The girl blinked, her young mind struggling to connect the dots. "Warren Buffett?" she repeated, the name unfamiliar to her. "Yes," the man said, his tone carrying an edge of cynicism. "But let's not pretend this is just about generosity. People like him only do things like this when it benefits their image." The girl frowned, clutching the envelope tighter. "He didn't even tell me his name," she said, her voice steady. "And he didn't have to help me at all. He just wanted to." The man opened his mouth to respond, but another voice cut through. "And what have you done today to make the world better?" It was the woman with the stroller, her gaze fixed on the man in the suit. He faltered, muttering something unintelligible before stepping back into the crowd. The girl stood quietly, watching the exchange with wide eyes. She didn't understand all the whispers or the questions about Warren's intentions, but she knew one thing. His kindness had changed her life. Meanwhile, Warren sat on a bench at the far end of the park, observing from a distance. He wasn't interested in the crowd or the debates. They were irrelevant to the moment. What mattered was that the girl now had a chance to ease the burdens on her and her mother. He had seen the strength in her, the determination to fight for her family, despite overwhelming odds. That was what had moved him. As he sat there, a young man approached cautiously. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice hesitant. "I couldn't help but notice what you did for that girl back there. That was incredible." Warren looked up, his expression calm. "It wasn't incredible," he said simply. "It was just the right thing to do." The young man nodded, clearly unsure how to respond. "Well, it's inspiring," he said after a moment. "I hope I can do something like that one day." Warren smiled faintly. "You don't need a lot of money to make a difference," he said. "Sometimes, all it takes is a little kindness and the willingness to act." The young man stood there for a moment, absorbing the words, before thanking Warren and walking away. Warren leaned back on the bench, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that his small act of generosity had planted seeds of hope, not just in the girl's life, but in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it. As the evening sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, the park gradually began to quiet down. The crowd around the young girl had dispersed, leaving her to gather her belongings. She carefully packed her bracelets and folded the blanket, but the envelope of money remained clutched tightly in her hand. Her mother, who had arrived a few minutes earlier, stood beside her, looking both overwhelmed and grateful. "Emily," her mother said softly, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Are you sure he just gave this to you? No strings attached." Emily nodded earnestly, her eyes bright with conviction. "He said it's for us, for rent and medicine, and he said to believe in myself." Her voice was steady, but her emotions were bubbling just beneath the surface. Her mother wiped a tear from her cheek and hugged her tightly. "Whoever that man was," she said, her voice trembling, "he's an angel." Meanwhile, at the far end of the park, Warren stood up from the bench and adjusted his jacket. He began walking toward the exit, his steps unhurried. But as he passed by the fountain again, Emily spotted him. Without hesitation, she ran toward him, her small frame moving as fast as her legs could carry her. "Wait!" she called out, her voice echoing in the quieting park. Warren turned, surprised to see her running toward him. He stopped, a warm smile spreading across his face as she reached him, slightly out of breath. "Thank you," she said again, her words rushing out. "Thank you for everything. I don't know how to say it enough." Warren crouched down so they were eye level. "You already have," he said gently. "The way you're taking care of your family and working so hard, that says more than words ever could." Emily hesitated for a moment, then held out one of her bracelets. It was simple, made of bright pink and purple beads. "I want you to have this," she said, "so you don't forget me." Warren took the bracelet carefully, his expression softening even further. "I could never forget you, Emily," he said, slipping it onto his wrist. "And I'll wear this as a reminder of what kindness and determination look like." Emily smiled through her tears, a mix of joy and relief washing over her. "I promise I'll do what you said," she told him. "When I grow up, I'll help someone the way you helped me." Warren's smile widened. "That's all I could ask for," he said. "You're going to do great things, Emily. I believe in you." As she turned to walk back to her mother, clutching the envelope like a lifeline, Warren watched her go with a quiet sense of fulfillment. He turned and walked out of the park, blending into the evening crowd as though nothing extraordinary had happened. That night, social media buzzed with posts and videos from the park. People who had witnessed the moment shared their accounts, praising the mysterious man's generosity and the young girl's heartfelt response. Some debated his intentions, while others focused on the lesson of selflessness and kindness. But for Warren, it wasn't about the attention. It was about the impact. A small act of generosity that could ripple out in ways he might never fully see. Emily and her mother used the money to stabilize their lives, paying off overdue bills and ensuring her mother got the treatment she needed. And true to her promise, Emily never forgot that moment. Years later, as she stood in a community center organizing a charity drive for families in need, she looked down at the bright pink bracelet she still wore and smiled. Warren's lesson had stayed with her, shaping her into someone who not only believed in herself, but also in the power of giving back. And somewhere far away, Warren Buffett sat quietly in another park, watching the world go by, carrying the same quiet smile and the bracelet on his wrist.